week that is quite fraught across the industry, and it's about just general operational chaos. A lot of this conversation, largely, there is a worksheet for it, but as you will find in the worksheet, that they are note pages. And so, what I want you guys to do this week is let's take those note pages and ultimately write down what ultimately is helpful for you and ultimately what you need to actually take out of this, because I'm going to talk about loads of different operational issues that I actually see happening every single day within agencies, and ultimately some of the most effective ways to actually deal with this. So what I see happen frequently across tons of agencies of all sorts of different sizes is that the agency owners are actually kind of just playing whack-a-mole. You're from one fire to the next fire to the next fire to the next fire to the next fire, but ultimately you're repeating the actual same fires on a daily basis, weekly basis, hourly basis. And ultimately, the number one mistake here is you're actually not operationalizing your agency, but you actually do not feel like you have the time to do so either. You're not really sure how you can get out of this current place that you're in, and it's incredibly aggravating. You don't know how you're going to do it. You don't know what you need to do. You are just completely overwhelmed by the existing state of your business. So ultimately, what we are going to be able to do here is first, the number one thing that is necessary is identify the issue to begin with. Once we're able to identify the issue, we're able to actually put together a plan to be able to mitigate that problem. And so I actually want us today to not only identify the problem, but actually start to actually implement and talk about the plan of action to alleviate those problems. So let's talk about high level. Here's the typical causes of operational chaos: self-created, missing processes, miscommunication, and client issues. So I want to tackle each one of them one at a time of what's actually going on for each one of these. But let's talk about the first one, which is going to be the hardest, I think, for many of us to stomach, and was for myself, is the self-created. So here's what I see happen most often is overreaction. So things may not have gone exactly as well as you would have wanted them to. They were not perfect in the way that they were executed. You may have said something and done something differently than what the team has done, and you overreacted. You are in a panic. You are concerned about what this means for the client relationship. You're concerned about what this means for the project. You're concerned about what this means for the final deliverable. And ultimately, I get it, right? As an entrepreneur, as a business owner, that the buck's supposed to stop with us, right? It does stop with us. But are you reacting or are you responding to the situation? And I want you to actually ask yourself in the situation is, does this actually need me to be involved? And am I just responding to the actual situation to mitigate an existing problem? Or am I potentially creating one? Because we create them a lot. The other thing that I see happen quite a lot is overarching micromanagement, which is actually typically a response to major operational problems. So, in order to actually try to mitigate the amount of strain that the business has because of lacking process or because of a major blunder that has happened in the past, we end up micromanaging our entire team or that specific system within the business, which ultimately never allows for us to actually move away from it because we're there controlling every single piece. Which leads me to the next thing: saving the day. We all do it. I've done it so many times, and I still have to fend myself off from doing it now. Is saving the day. We come in with our Superman or Superwoman cape and ultimately save the team from the blunder that they're about to make, or actually save the day from the blunder they're currently making, rather than potentially rescheduling the date that we're going to be presenting to the client, to allow the team to actually solve their own problems, to learn from their mistakes so that they can actually be better for it next time. But instead, we do it ourselves. We come in and make everything better. And we do two things that actually dramatically negatively impact the business. One, we fail to allow our team to learn, which means that they're always going to rely on us. And two, we've actually started to set the expectation that we are going to do that. And so not only are we causing the team to not learn in that situation, but we're preventing them as time goes on to even have the ability to do that on their own, which leaves us in a pretty bad spot, especially for those that right now, if you are an agency owner and you do not have any time, but you have a team and you know that the team is entirely reliant on you, this is likely why. Overreaction, micromanagement, and you're saving the day. All right. So how do you actually solve for this? The answer is actually pretty simple, but it is extremely anxiety driving. Is you need to leave a void. You need to leave space for your team to fill. You have to exit some of the day-to-day operations. And I'm not saying completely exit so that you have no idea what's going on and that ultimately things can just blow up in your face. That's not the correct response either. That's just completely abdicating your role. But you need to actually leave a void. Let them actually create and make some mistakes. Let them solve some of their own mistakes. Watch them actually solve it in the wrong way a couple of times. Not so much that they are crashing into a wall head on, but maybe where the car just kind of rubs up against the center divider a little bit. Little bit of damage, but not overly catastrophic, and it's ultimately okay. And that's ultimately what you need to do, because this does a couple of things. This one allows the team to learn. This allows for them to solve. This allows for them to come to you when they actually need you so that you can guide them. Don't save the day again. You give them direction on what they need to do themselves to solve for it. Mentor them, coach them, teach them to be better so that they can solve it in future. It also allows for you to identify the problems within your agency that we ultimately need to solve for, which leads me to the next piece, is missing processes. So I don't know that I need to go down why processes are so important. They are extremely important, and ultimately the entire catalyst for me to be able to go from working 80-hour weeks to now in the 20 to 30-hour weeks now has been systems, has been processes. And largely for me, the best way to actually go about, and this is how we started our systems implementation, was entirely in video. So every single time someone asked a question, we just quickly created a video that ultimately amassed to a substantial size repository of trainings for our team that we eventually documented into SOPs and ultimately allowed for us to be able to have our team have access to those trainings within project management. Allowed it completely, and honestly completely changed my life for the better. And I know that so many operational people talk about operations and processes and systems and SOPs not being the sexy part of the business, but quite frankly, I think it actually is. Everyone thinks of marketing and sales as the part that's fun. But actually, I think that operations here actually is the most fun because it allows for sales and marketing to actually function. And two, it allows for you to actually have your life back. It allows for you to actually have and be able to step away from the office and know that everything's not going to blow up. It's a way for you to actually be able to enjoy the fruit of all of that work that you have put into your business. And without it, well, you're going to be handcuffed to your business every single day. All right, this leads me to the third thing, miscommunication. And so there's miscommunication from cross-departmental to having to redo work. But ultimately, here's the thing that I see in client miscommunication. The vast majority of the actual thing that I actually see happening here is communication that is actually not being documented. There's not allowing for us to be able to actually transfer the information fully from one side to another. And actually having communication standards of how it is that you communicate is one of the most important pieces. So how do you define whether there's communication breakdown? As I just mentioned, projects, typically you're going over budget. You have work being redone because it actually didn't hit the mark. It wasn't what the client was looking for. Or you're going through loads of revisions on what's actually happening. The other pieces are you have really high admin time in your time logs. Those are all indicators for me of miscommunication. So how do you solve for it? The first piece that I typically suggest is that you actually want to have documented communication standards. So, where does actually communication live in the first place? What systems are you utilizing for communication? And across so many agencies, and this was true for me as well, you've got project management communication, you got communication that's happening in your cell phone, you've got communication that's coming in via text message, you got communication that's coming in Slack. That's just to name a few. There's probably more forms of communication that happen every single day within your agency as well. Too many forms of communication. What do I use for what? How do I make sure that everybody knows what's actually going on? And then how do I actually catalog it so that I know and everybody that needs it has access to it? I am pretty certain for the vast majority of you, this is a problem. Not necessarily the problem you need to solve today, depending on how many people you have. Once you start to get between the 6 to 10 people plus is when this starts to become really important. But you need to document, where do you communicate for what? How is it that you make sure that everyone has the communication available? And what is the platform that you utilize for when? So, like, for example, for us, text messaging or phone calls is something that is urgent that needs a response within the next 30 minutes to an hour. Instant message is meant for something that needs to be responded to within the next 2 hours. And our project management tool is something that needs to be responded to in the same day. So we utilize different forms of communication for specific things, but we also do not ever assign anything in any other form of communication aside from project management. If it's something that was just recently assigned that needs urgent attention, we may link to it within our instant message platform that allows for the team to actually just directly link to it. Hey, this is an urgent item. Really need you to take a look at it. We just link to it so that the person actually can just go directly to where that communication is. That allows for every single thing to actually be tied to a project. And anything that needs to be utilized multiple times is added to an FAQ document for us. But for you, it may be your creative brief. How do you actually update the creative brief for the different types of work that you're doing for the client? And then how do you have an overarching client potential creative brief that allows for you to be able to have the entire team managed appropriately? And then finally, client issues. So client issues can be very far reaching, but ultimately what I want you to be thinking about, they fall into typically a couple of categories, miscommunication being one of them, scope management being another, revisions being a problem because we missed the mark as well. Those are the typical issues that we actually have with clients that are largely solved by some of the prior items. The only one that isn't is the scope management, which we actually just spoke about last week as well. And how do you actually manage demanding clients? Highly recommend you check out that training that allows for you to think about holistically how you can actually allow for those demanding clients to go from being those overly demanding, overly controlling clients into your ideal client profile that ultimately you enjoy working with. Do me a favor, check out that training about client issues. I hope this training this week was useful. I know it's a bit of a different format than we typically are utilizing in these weekly trainings. I wanted to give you guys kind of a really large overarching grasp to what we actually see happening across operational issues for agencies by and large, and wanted to give you guys a direction to how do you identify what is the problem that you are having today, and then ultimately how can you solve for that. If you guys have any questions about how these items may apply for you or the nuance that actually is true to your agency, do me a favor, go ahead and shoot us over a DM or go ahead and comment below. We're absolutely here to help you out and make sure that we get your operations running really smoothly.